All right, everybody. So we're going to finish up these themes that we see in the life of Abraham. You already should be familiar with the theme that we discussed last time, which was all about covenant. It was the covenant that we see not only in Abraham's life, but throughout the biblical narrative, the central, or at least a central theme throughout the Bible. So we talked through that a little bit. So before we move on to the next one, just make sure you watch those videos for the Melchizedek or priesthood theme, as well as the final, which we'll talk about in a moment. So if you haven't watched that yet, pause this video and go watch the priesthood Melchizedek video. But once you do, let's just make sure that we got all of those notes filled in. So as they said in the video, there's sort of a symbolic representation, or at least a symbolic parallel, between humans working in the garden and the role of priests in the temple. Okay, so as it said, the humans are chosen for a particular task, and the priests, in some sense, play that same role as members of the community of the Hebrews. Now, the family of Hebrews act as a priest for the world. So the humans in the garden, the humans that are tending the garden, are like the priests who act as the keepers of the temple, which we've talked about before, but then even beyond that, the Hebrews act as a priesthood to all of humanity, okay? And so we see this parallel kind of continued here in the between the garden and humanity. We've got humans who rebel against God in the garden and thus are exiled from the garden. This is sort of a precursor to Israel, who fails the covenant as well, or specifically the covenant partnership that they make with God, and so they are exiled then from their land. So this symbolic parallelism works when we look at both of these aspects of what happens in the garden and what happens with the Hebrew people as a whole, and their relationship with the land. So humans receive the promise of a priest who will restore all things. This is back in Genesis chapter 3 when we were talking about Adam and Eve, and we saw that they did what they did, and then God gave these sort of curses, but he also sort of gave a promise, which was that as you remember, the descendant of the human is going to crush the head of the serpent, right? This promise entails, as it says here, a priest who will come to restore all things for everyone, for all humanity. And so then, as we see with Abraham, this couple or family is chosen as those priestly representatives. And it is from this couple that we get the Hebrew family. And again, the Hebrew family, they are the ones through whom God will restore and redeem all of humanity. Okay? Now, it's interesting that we see Abraham come across this guy named Melchizedek, who obviously is not a member of Abraham's family. However, he still worships Yahweh, God. And so this is actually very interesting because remember, Abraham is the progenitor of the Hebrew people, and the entire, let's say, faith or religion of Judaism and then thus Christianity that follows begins with Abraham. And so it is these people that are known worldwide throughout history for worshiping the God of the Bible, Yahweh. But before any of that even got started, we do have this guy, Melchizedek, who is a king and a priest, who apparently worships the same God. And so Abraham honors him as the priesthood, which is an important factor because it has to do with Abraham's faith and trust in God, right? Now, one of the things that happens as a part of this is that Abraham must offer his son as a sacrifice, right? And so this is a really, really difficult decision to make. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's a question of how Abraham is responding to God's work and God's call as a priesthood. And so Abraham does it, and God provides. But the point is that God is showing Abraham that God will provide and always does so. And so that's why it's important to remember that not only did God provide for Abraham in this one scenario, this is kind of a demonstration of the fact that God continues to provide and will always do so. So before you move on with your notes, at this point you should stop and watch the next video in order to be prepared for these. So do that. You can watch that video on the test. Once you've watched that, we can continue here. So Adam and Eve are given a choice. We're going all the way back to the beginning again, because remember, these are different lenses through which we can look at the whole story of the Bible. So Adam and Eve are given that choice in the beginning, eat from the tree or not, and it's really, you could consider it sort of a test. This might seem kind of strange. The question is that cruel? Is it a cruel or a weird thing for God to test the people in this way, or test God's people in this way, giving them the opportunity to fail, right? Why would God set them up possibly for failure? But as it said in the video, there are a couple of ways that we can think about this. A test could be looked at in a negative way and a positive way. Either the test could be an opportunity, right? An opportunity to prevail and improve or show yourself, your worthiness or whatever. But it also could be considered a trap. And so that's what it was with the serpent, right? The serpent kind of trapped the humans. So the question is, well, how are we going to think about this? Initially, given this first choice in the garden, the humans fail this test. So we could think of it as God offering them the choice, right? Because free will is an important thing. God offers them the choice to choose God and make the right decision. They fail, unfortunately. And one day, again, this goes back to the promise that God makes for the descendant. God says that one day a human will pass the test and then will be the one to restore all things and all people. So again, Abraham is given an opportunity, and it might be weird to call it that. It might feel strange to call this test where he's asked to sacrifice his son Isaac. It might be strange to call that an opportunity. He does pass it because he's obedient to God, at least he's going to be, and then God, of course, at the last minute rescues Isaac and provides a sacrifice. This is a really strange and difficult scenario because the question is, should we commit murder or something if God asks us to? And this is something that Abraham struggles with. But also in the biblical narrative, really more so what Abraham struggles with is trusting that this is what God wanted because he was promised a son. And this, his son, was the sacrifice being asked for, so it kind of is like God going back on the promise that was given. So it's a very strange thing that's happening here, and Abraham is struggling with, well, what's actually going to happen as a result? So one way that we can think about this is that it's not necessarily setting up a scenario that we're meant to put ourselves in literally, as in, is it something that we should do? If God were to ask us to kill somebody, first of all, is that something that God would do? But would we do it if God asked us to do it? I don't think that that's what the text is trying to do. It's not trying to necessarily put us in that position to ask that specific question. What the text is trying to do is offer a very difficult scenario that says, what is it that we will do in order to trust God? Okay? So I think we should be careful about putting ourselves in the position where we would say, okay, if God asked me to kill somebody, then I would do it. I don't know that that's the point of what the biblical authors are doing. I think they're setting up a scenario where we need to ask ourselves, to what extent will we trust God with our lives? Okay? So the thing is that the several covenants that we looked at are all part of this uh, covenant process, this partnership process with God. And after Abraham, we have the Israelites, and the Israelites, as they have a kind of reiterated or newer covenant, they end up failing that covenant as well. They fail the tests that they're given in following God. Now, later on, the whole point is that Jesus comes later through the Hebrew people. Remember, it is through the Hebrew people that we are all restored. But Jesus comes through the Hebrew people, and he passes the test. And so ultimately, this is on behalf of all of humanity. Okay? So that's the importance of Jesus. And so we have to remember that the priest, so the covenant includes the representatives of the covenant, right? And Jesus is the representative of the covenant that is able to pass the test, and therefore all things can be restored. All right?